Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, where we talk BYU, Big 12, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, conference realignment. And today we continue our ACC spotlight going around the conference to talk to fans from each school to get their unique takes on realignment. So if you like talking conference realignment, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to continue to catch the rest of this series, as well as our other content. Also, do let us know your thoughts in the comments. I love getting all the thoughts and feedback and do my best to respond to everyone and catch all those comments and engage with you. And that's really why we do this. So tonight, as I mentioned, I've got a guest here I'm really excited about. Rec Talk joins us to give us the Georgia Tech perspective. And welcome to the show.
Trevor, yeah, appreciate you having me on, man. It's definitely an honor. And my channel's Rec Talk. You can go check that out. I've done a few conference realignment videos, but yeah, man, excited to talk about everything you got lined up.
All right. So how I came across you is you showed up in my feed a couple of times. And from what I saw, I mean, you really had some heaters going. You weren't pulling punches. I loved it. And I thought, this is someone who I really want to have come on and talk about realignment because you're definitely saying some things that a lot of the other people I have on aren't saying, and I love it. But before we get to that, and Georgia Tech and the ACC and all that mess, taking the 1,000-foot view, what is your feeling or thought on basically the landscape in college football right now and all the changes that are happening with NIL and all the other things going through the court right now and how it's impacting the game?
Well, it seems like people fall into starkly, like this is a very binary outlook on just college football in general. So you kind of have the purist that's like everything before was perfect and there was nothing wrong with it and it's absolutely fine. And then you have the people on the other side that are like, look, it is what it is. This is the way it's going to be. Nothing needs to change. I don't think there's many that say nothing needs to change. But look, I think I don't have a problem with paying players. So that's kind of the first big thing. People are kind of in one side or the other on paying players. And I think you got to realize like that since the NCAA started, college football is infinitely different. I mean, college football is infinitely different than it was 10 years ago to now. So it started as a way of protecting players. Like I think the genesis of it was a player got hurt and the school's like, well, he's not associated with us. We don't owe anything. So it started with good intentions, right? And then you started having schools clear 80, 100 million or more. And tuition didn't seem like a fair trade. Like no one goes out to watch Dabo Swinney coach a football game. They go to watch those players play though. And I think just their tuition being paid is probably not fair recompense. But unfortunately, we just opened the floodgates open. And now there's no rules. And we've sued the NCAA into oblivion where now that they don't really have any power either. And that's something I've talked about in my videos. Like it takes two to tango. So yes, the NCAA was inept in how they tried to shape the landscape of college football, but they've also, what are they going to do if every time they make a decision, they get sued into oblivion? So I think eventually we'll get to something that works. Right now, I think it's an absolute, how do I say this nicely? It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up in terms of NIL. I totally agree that it makes sense to pay players. I mean, especially when schools are profiting so heavily off of these players specifically, and for them to not, get compensated for that, especially like you're selling jerseys with their names and everything, like
with their number. You couldn't put their name on it, but you're buying a number 3 jersey when Todd Gurley's at Georgia because you like Todd Gurley.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they're profiting. So, but I guess my point is that it's not just the football product; it is driven by the players too, very much. So, in terms of the fans and their engagement with the team, and so, it makes total sense. But then what we've ended up with is just crazy, where these NIL deals, where people are getting, insane amounts of money that don't accurately reflect the value that they're bringing, at least in terms of, in terms of
with no commitment.
Right.
That's the other problem. That's what I think we'll end up. We'll have to get to contracts at some point, because now you can't say they're not employees of the school. All right, there's already, I forget the school, a small school in Alabama that's trying to unionize or going through that. And I don't want to get into like the politics. It doesn't matter. The point is, you got to allow that kind of thing if they're gonna be employees of the school. And the way around that, I think the cleanest way is just have a contract. Hey, commit to 1, 2, 3, 4 years. All right, then you could have stipulations of whether you play in the bowl game or not. There's a bonus associated with that, or you owe the school back money. And I think you can get around a lot of this.
Yeah, I think contracts makes a lot of sense because you see guys, going and with no commitment, and they'll leave, which I think is fair too. I think coaches have had the flexibility to leave, and obviously, if your coach leaves, you've always had that ability. But I think that's fair. But on the other hand, the schools is putting all this investment in you, and then you up and leave. And so, yeah, it seems like there's got to be some sort of give and take in that. And so, yeah, probably contracts of some level. But anyway, I'm not pretending to have all the answers. I just think it has gotten wildly out of hand. And in terms of the rest of it, in terms of realignment and the playoff and all this stuff, college football has always been changing. Realignment's always existed, as Georgia Tech fans know, having formerly been in some other conferences.
The SEC, yeah.
Yeah. And, and at the time, it made sense to leave. And currently, obviously now you're looking at the ACC and the condition they're in, or the state that's going. And but it seems to be realignment seems to be going more and more in the way of, not so much realigning as it is consolidating, and that's consolidating all the money as well as all the brands and everything. And instead of, like, we were always looking, at least I was never a big fan of the BCS. I wanted to see that change, and then we get a playoff, and the idea was that it was going to become more inclusive. But with every change that we've gotten, that was kind of what we were asking for, they still find a way to do it in a way that benefits a select few and kind of pushes out or ostracizes or whatever the rest. And so it's like, wait, this is what I was asking for, but why does it not feel like I'm getting a fair shake in this? So,
well, it's implemented in a ridiculous way. So, like, it's kind of like, I might have a good message, but if I present it to you on a trash can lid, it's hard to really hear what you're saying. So there weren't any hard guidelines to who made the playoffs. And those guidelines that were soft ended up changing. So at one point, a quarterback being injured didn't disqualify from the playoffs. And then last year with Florida State, all of a sudden that was a big factor. So I think them not having well-defined guidelines of what made you in the playoffs is what muddied it up.
Last year, definitely showed the whole system is a mess because, were they getting in on merit, what they did in the season? Are we saying the regular season matters, or are you just kind of picking who you think you want to see there is going to impact ratings or whatever? And
right. You don't think ESPN didn't have some kind of leverage into the best TV matchups? Probably. I can't verify that, but it would make, with the current landscape of realignment, it would make logical sense.
Yeah. So now that we've brought up ESPN and the impact that they've had on realignment, we're looking at the ACC, the situation that the conference is in with, obviously two big brands trying to, they're currently all engaged in suits and countersuits with the ACC and trying to get out, trying to get to one of these bigger conferences that's getting these big paydays. And it's putting the ACC in kind of a precarious situation. So what is your read on all the lawsuits and how that's going from a kind of a Georgia Tech perspective? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I'm one of the few people on YouTube that will be honest with you in that question. As far as what's going to happen with these lawsuits, I don't have the first clue what's going to happen with these lawsuits, and neither does anyone else. All right. Even experts in contract law, and specifically these types of contracts, don't know what's going to happen with this. Otherwise, one side of the lawyers' table would be empty because they know that they don't have a case or they're going to lose. This is something that's going to be argued, all right, for years. First of all, these aren't cheap lawsuits and they're not quick lawsuits. So there's a lot of things that could happen. I do think one side has a stronger argument, and I think that's the ACC, which is not what you're hearing from a lot of people. A lot of people are talking about the ACC as if it's already collapsed. It's already dead and gone. It makes me think of Nick Saban when like he dropped a game years back. They're talking about us like we're dead and gone. And that's how they're talking about the ACC. Nothing has been decided yet. All right. First of all, Clemson and Florida State signed this grant of rights. Not once, but twice they signed it. And I'm pretty sure they had some fairly smart lawyers look over it. And if they didn't, shame on them. You know, you should have. It's never been challenged in this way. There's a few things that I do think are strong for Clemson and Florida State. One is it Swafford? He had some relationship with Bally Sports he didn't disclose, like his son was the vice president of Bally Sports. Now that is messed up. You do have to disclose things like that. Does that mean the contract is invalid? You're going to have to argue it over the next 5 years. And with your lawyers' fees you're paying, lawyers that make $1,000, $1,500 an hour, 30 of them, you might end up paying a significant portion of what your buyout would be anyway, just in legal fees. So I don't know. I do think there's a path forward for the ACC. And I don't, people that are just saying, oh, it's just a date on a calendar when they leave. I don't know that either. You had a guy on your college huddle group, a lawyer that talked about, yeah, you might get out of the ACC, but there's two things: the grant of rights. Even if the Magnificent Seven vote to disband this thing, I don't know that gets you out of your media right obligation either. So this is extremely complicated. And honestly, I want to stick my head in the sand and pop up in 5 years and just know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There are so many different ways that this could all shake out. And, everyone thinks they have the answers, and I certainly don't. But what is your read with Florida State and Clemson specifically? And at this point, do you want them to be able to have to stay in the ACC, or are you kind of like, we need to get rid of them and we can kind of regroup and move forward?
It's a good question. So you got two people. I mean, it's like when you at your job. I mean, you don't want to have a disgruntled employee that just doesn't want to be there. It's not generally good for your group, right? That breeds a lot of discontent and not a great attitude. But that might mean the demise of the ACC. And that's the other thing for people saying, well, the ACC is going to have to work with them on a reduced buyout. Why? Why would they participate in their own demise? As far as my read on it, I think you might just have to weather the storm with it. I would do cards on the table. Do I want them to stay? Yes, because that's what's best for the conference and that's what's best for my team. They are the two biggest TV money draws in the conference, and it's not even close. The parity between them and then number 3 is many, like tens of millions of dollars per year. But yeah, I would like them to stay. I don't know what that looks like. You got some people saying June 30th they're going to be out, which if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you and some other things.
That does seem really soon. Although at this point, I've learned to not discredit anything in college realignment because, just about anything.
You can discredit that. I mean, you can take that to the bank.
Yeah, that does seem rather soon, especially with all of the.
Didn't they say that last August too? I think they did.
And it's okay. The deadline and the benchmark for that will always be kind of pushed down, and there'll be a new date to chase. But so it's been wild watching it from the outside, trying to figure out what's going on, and just to hear the perspectives of the schools that want to leave versus the schools that are maybe want to ride their coattails, or others that want to hold it all together. And so you think it's in Georgia Tech's interest, or that's where Georgia Tech is kind of like, hey, we want to keep the whole family together and kind of
Yeah.
push through this and regroup.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is like, look, in my opinion, there's only two teams that I think would have a landing spot. Now, we'll set aside technically, you're not supposed to have a conference contact these schools. That's
Right.
technically against the rules, but we know strange things happen. They're the only two that have a landing spot, though. You hear North Carolina, Virginia, I don't get. I don't get it all being talked about as having a definite landing spot. I think, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Boston College, Pitt, Duke, those are probably five schools that are on the outside looking in, that it's most likely they would end up in the Big 12 just based on their revenue. But teams like Virginia, Virginia Tech, even North Carolina, their TV revenue is not much different than those other teams if you look at it. So the people saying, oh, they definitely have a landing spot, I think is a little bit delusional to say you definitely have a landing spot. I think that's unknown at best. And then play that thought experiment out. Let's say the ACC does implode, and I like to pick on North Carolina because they're 1-for-6 against us in the last 6 years, and that was Jeff Collins' first year, which was the worst coach in history. Let's put North Carolina in an SEC schedule for the next 5 years. Do you think they're above 500?
Probably not.
At best, it's you don't know. And so,
Right.
as a fan, what do you care about? My team winning. That's what I care about as a fan. And if they're not winning, I'm not watching. This trend of TV revenue just skyrocketing up, I can tell you as a numbers guy, is not sustainable. And
Right.
I think 10 years from now, looking back on it, we're going to be like, man, I got a little out of hand. And so there's going to be some conferences with some buyer's remorse.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting point because you have to, Florida State wants out. Absolutely. I mean, it feels like they're burning all the bridges they can, whereas Clemson's playing maybe a little nicer and maybe hedging their bets a little bit. But I just think about Florida State. Let's say they are in the Big Ten, for example, and now they're traveling to Minnesota in late October or something, or in November to play these games. And I mean, I know Florida State has a huge fan base, but what impact is that going to have on recruiting or, and all these things? Are they going to succeed? I mean, we've looked at other programs in realignment that have not been able to transition very well. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean
Maryland?
no. Yeah, I mean, they weren't exactly a powerhouse, but like you looked at Nebraska, and they've completely fallen off, and A&M hasn't really done much in the SEC. And
No. Well, is Maryland much different than Virginia? Could you just switch Maryland and Virginia? Would you probably get the same result? You probably would.
Well, and that's when you look at what conferences are valuing and what they're trying to get in realignment. And it's you want quality brands, which I think is a huge thing. You also talk about markets, which is all Maryland was. That was purely a market thing that they wanted to get into.
How well is that working out for Maryland?
Well, the Big Ten's cashing in and Maryland's cashing in, and they're at the in the quote unquote power two conferences right now. And so if they're happy just cashing the checks, I guess that's great. I guess it depends on what they really want. But
when was the last time you heard them talked about on ESPN?
I mean, they're not, and they're not relevant. I mean, they weren't super relevant before in the ACC either, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so I do wonder, I mean, is this all these moves for these schools? It's like, yeah, you're going to be included. You're going to get all this money, but that does not guarantee success going forward. And
which should be your goal.
Right. And I wonder at what point does all that money stop? What is the additional value of an additional dollar after a certain point? Like there's only like so many facilities you can build and get and all these fancy weight rooms and locker rooms and other things that they can do. I mean, I know they keep throwing money at it. I've heard, about Alabama's facilities and others and Oregon's, but at some point, is there not a diminishing return on all of those dollars? And then what are you doing with it if not winning football games? And so what is the point of all that?
It's hard to say with NIL though, because no one knows what schools spend on NIL. I don't think that has to be made public, or what collectives around it. So it seems like there's kind of this black box, Pandora's box of money surrounding that. So yeah, who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, right now the schools, my understanding is they can't pay, the students directly through NIL deals, right?
Virginia just passed a law that they
Well,
can.
that's true. That's true. And we'll see what, impact that has on the rest of the landscape, and how that's affected going forward. So, but having said all that, talking about what schools or the conference's priorities are, I think the Big Ten, for example, has shown that it is a priority for them. I mean, they always talk about the AAU schools and academics and things, but right now, I think something that was really telling is when they decided they had USC and UCLA, and then they decided to go ahead and add Washington as well as Oregon. And for me, Oregon is at, you look at the metrics, and I've seen other things online. I can't recite everything back to you. I honestly am not an expert on how these research universities are organized, whatever. But from what I've seen, they're kind of at the bottom of the barrel of the AAU, and
Do they have AAU? I'm
they
not even
do.
sure. Okay.
They do, but apparently it's just they're just kind of meeting those thresholds, versus, and they have Nebraska, who technically lost their status before
They did lose it.
before they even started, before they officially, they were accepted when they had AAU status, but they lost that status before they ever even were officially members of the Big Ten. And so, and then Oregon, when the Big Ten could have taken Stanford, which, the Bay Area market is bigger than the whole state of Oregon, right?
Sure.
And so when you talk about market size or academics, to me, I was like, oh, they really weighed brand more heavily there. But
Yeah.
but having said that, Georgia Tech does have those things going for it in terms of realignment. So when we talk about landing spots for different schools, you look at the SEC, seems like a long shot. Like, they're in Georgia, they've got a pretty good hold on Georgia. There's
Never
not
going to happen.
additional value, especially. I mean, we saw it with they added Texas into A&M, or in UT into another second school into the state of Texas when they already had A&M. But that was kind of a different scenario because you're adding a huge brand. But Georgia, I think, has a lot more sway than probably A&M in the SEC. So SEC seems like that's probably about a 0% chance. But
Yep.
Big Ten, there is an outside chance that Georgia Tech, because of the Atlanta market, is just humongous, and you meet the academic requirements. It gives the Big Ten a foothold into the SEC, the heart of the SEC territory. It kind of gives you an outside chance on that. Do you think that if the ACC were to implode, that Georgia Tech could possibly swing that and find its way into the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think, in the video I did about this, I put a percentage on it. Like, I did all the schools and what percentage chance they had. I guess we're calling it the Super Two or whatever. As far as the Big Ten, it's probably around a 30% or less chance that Georgia Tech would end up in the Big Ten, which kind of squares with your, they're an outside looking in. And I've argued with my own channel fan base about this. There's kind of the rose-colored glasses way of looking at it, which you put. Yeah, Georgia Tech is an AAU member. And just as a side note, AAU has as much to do with research as it does like just straight academics. So you could be a fantastic academic school, but it's a big part of that is what research you do.
Right.
So we have that, the tradition, history. Yep. Got all that. But then you have to look at, okay, how much of the Atlanta market does Tech own? Does Tech really have? In other words, how many people in Atlanta are Florida State fans, or Auburn fans, or Clemson fans, or Georgia fans? Does Georgia Tech even own the majority of that Atlanta market? And that's not clear to me. So it's not clear to me that, it gets you the foothold in the Atlanta market you think that it does. And look, the first thing these conferences are going to look at, because again, like with the grant of rights, getting into a conference, there's two sides of that. There's the schools have to vote you in, and you aligning with the conferences, whatever. and then the TV contract that comes with it. So the first and foremost thing is, what money can you add? You talked about they added Texas after they already had A&M. I think Texas is the second biggest brand in the country. It's like Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, something like that. So that made all the sense in the world for them. Tech has got, if they were to sell to the Big Ten, it would have to be on potential. If you add us, because when you look at TV numbers, like you look at SMU coming into the ACC, their TV numbers are awful. But that, with them playing on an ACC schedule, how do they look? And similarly, I picked on Virginia. If you put Virginia in a Big Ten schedule, their numbers are going to be better naturally. So you'd have to pitch potential. And for Georgia Tech, our troubles couldn't have come at a worse time. We just went through the worst stretch of basketball and football. And I've done a ton of videos on Clown Collins and wanting to cage fight. I put a challenge out to cage fight the guy. He hasn't reached out yet, but you couldn't have picked the worst time to go through those stretches. So you got to start winning. Winning solves a lot of things. Winning starts bringing in money. Winning gets donor money flowing back in. And I think Tech is well positioned for that. And I think as long as the thing doesn't implode in the next year or two, Tech will be in a much better spot. But we are on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like it's a long shot. Then I guess and there's several schools you'd probably put ahead, but obviously the SEC will be vying for some of those schools, well, you assume at least. And then it also comes down to just how big does the Big Ten really want to get, and who else is on that list and who else is available. I mean, if they want to keep growing and taking in tons of schools, you think eventually that, that's just going to improve Georgia Tech's odds. But maybe you guys could get Chris Bosch to come out and you remember when he made that pitch for the All-Star game? It's like a car dealer. Yeah. Maybe get on and do another video for the Big Ten. Maybe that would help.
Chris Bosch was sick. Well, and the other thing is, I don't think the Big Ten wants to grow, or the SEC, but they're in this Cold War type arms race.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps pushing this thing, right? So who knows how that ends.
Yeah, I don't know. And really, what is the point at which they're going to say, look, we're not going to keep doing this? Or when you talk about there's no longer additional value, like those TV contracts are probably only going to get so big. And then what's the additional value? Is it, well, our schools want to be in Georgia because then that helps with recruiting in the South? Or, we want to, the Big Ten network, and we want the cable subscriptions or whatever it is that Atlanta brings. I don't know. I don't know if that's as big a focus as it once was when they added Maryland and Rutgers as it is now with streaming and everything. But
yeah, and you have to look at your exposure. I mean, at a certain point, your risk is so high to have that big of a TV contract. And this is a video that I'm going to do on the channel soon. Like, are we in a bubble? And getting back to how sustainable is this? We had a huge drop in population through the pandemic or whatever. And so you got a lot less people when that generation gets college age that are going to be watching this. So what effect is all that going to have? Are people going to keep watching college football like they have been? And I guarantee you that there are things in those TV contracts that if viewership drops below a certain point, it kicks other clauses into them. So again, we got to wait and see.
That's a great point. That's interesting. That's you're the first one I've heard bring up the population decline and how that could potentially impact football down the road. And what I look at is, it seems like these two big conferences, everyone that's part of, these blue blood, big time, football programs thinks, man, this is going to be awesome. We're just going to have all these big time programs playing week in and week out. And I just think, part of what made all of those games exciting is that they were special. They were unique. It was, it was once a year in a bowl game, or maybe, in more recent history where it was, the kickoff at the beginning of the year, so it's that first game, which almost had kind of that big time bowl game type atmosphere because your college football is back. We've got these two programs, and they're playing neutral territory, and it was exciting. But, I think it's going to lose some of that specialness, when it's all the time, but then also you lose so much of what makes college football special. So all these big time programs think, well, how much do you guys bring to the table? Look at all these ratings we get. What do you guys bring? But what everybody else brings is each one of them is bringing their own fan base, their own little piece of this much bigger pie, right? That everybody's contributing to. And you start tearing a lot of that away, all of a sudden, yeah, sure, you got big brands and there's a lot of people interested in it. But at the end of the day, you start excluding everybody. I think you're gonna lose all those other brands and all those other people that did care. And I don't see what incentive they have to start caring about a college football system which they're no longer included in. And so it's kind of like, yeah, you're the biggest brands and you carry a lot of it, but also you start excluding people, they're not going to be you're not going to have all those other people following or caring about the product that you're putting out there. So they kind of need the little guy or these other schools as well. Otherwise, they're just a mini NFL, which is not going to be as good of a football product.
Well, we just watch the NFL if we wanted that. I mean,
Well, right, exactly.
and the other thing is people are usually either diehard college football fans or they're like diehard NFL fans. You don't see people that are really big into both. And it is becoming more like that. And the other thing is there can only be one primetime game on each network. So if you've made these super conferences where they all have to play each other, you can only watch so many games, right? So if they all play each other during the regular season, I would think viewership for some of those games starts kind of seesawing back and forth too. So
yeah, so to say like, oh, we don't need these other guys, or just to kind of start excluding, I think is misguided. And then when you look at it too, and you think, well, okay, fine, you're going to do these super conferences, but then you, look at a lot of the guys who are in those conferences. You've mentioned Maryland. A lot of these people that are riding the coattails currently of these bigger brands, and just because of history or proximity or whatever, that they've somehow made it in. It's like, well, yeah, and you lose a lot of the rivalries, because you start thinking, if the SEC ever gets to the point where, right now they're holding out on not increasing the number of conference games they have to play, but at some point it might mean losing the SEC ACC rivalry games that we have, like Georgia Tech. We've got Louisville Kentucky, Florida State, whoever else. And so and you lose more and more of those rivalries that are already being torn apart by all this.
Yeah, and bringing it kind of back, as far as the court cases, it's not just the ACC that's interested in that grant of rights holding. Because if that grant of rights doesn't hold, then all the other grant of rights are no good either. Then you can go from the SEC to the Big Ten. They have a more recent contract. So there's a lot of interest in holding that. And, what do these conferences look like in that? Like, do they hold as well? And another thing I haven't heard talked about is, what is the perception of Florida State now that they've kind of cried like a baby? If they come in the SEC and they feel like they're, because a lot of times you get a reduced share, right? Do they cry about that? Do they try and sue the SEC if they're not getting what they want in the SEC? So those teams have to vote you in too. Sorry to kind of go back and forth, but that just came to my mind.
No, that's a good point too, because Florida State. Well, if you look at what Oregon and Washington are getting initially going to the Big Ten, I think the number, and I should have them in front of me, but I think they're pretty similar to what the Big Ten is going to be pulling in, which is not far off from what the ACC is currently making. I think they're all in the same general ballpark. And so you go through all these legal fees, all these issues, you go through all this trouble to get out, and then you're going to go and take partial revenue. You wonder, I guess it's like, great, now you're included. Now the next time they get a TV contract, but as you said, it could be down the road that these TV contracts course correct, and maybe there's not as much money, or who knows how that's going to go. But I do think is a interesting component to this. Is at the end of the day, they might go through all this, and then because they're upset about not making as much, and then come away making virtually the same amount, at least initially.
Sure.
But okay, because at BYU, we talk Big 12, so I got to talk about at least the Big 12 perspective in all of this. So you mentioned, BC, Duke, Wake, some of these others potentially going to the Big 12. I got to say, I reject that. I don't think these guys have a home even in the Big 12. I think there would be, I think there's other options that would be better fit for the Big 12 that would more likely come around first. And the Big 12's had options to add Oregon State Oregon State and Washington State, and chose not to add them. And so I don't see, and I think those are two, at least in terms of football, better brands than those schools. But Georgia Tech is one that I think is very interesting because for the reasons I laid out for why they're an argument for the ACC or for the Big Ten. They also bring a lot of value for the Big 12, who I think in the next wave of realignment would like to get more on the East Coast and get more in a region where the conference isn't currently. So I think Georgia Tech out of the ACC probably has the broadest range of potential outcomes out of any other school, because you could be stuck there with the BCs and the Wakes and have to either recreate the ACC or go join another conference, or however that shakes out, right? Or you could go all the way up to Big 10 or somewhere in the middle with the Big 12. If the
Relegated to the group. Yeah, you can say it.
it could end up in the American, who knows, however that shakes out. So I feel like the Tech has the broadest range of potential outcomes. But if it came down to it, because I think it depends on where all these other schools go, again, how big the SEC and Big Ten want to get and which schools. And I'm just talking in the case that the ACC does implode, which is not guaranteed. And so there are scenarios in which I could see Georgia Tech actually going to the Big 12. If that were the case, what would you make of that?
I'd be happy that I was in one of the power conferences like that. When I've put out some kind of angry videos about this. I won't hide behind that. And I'll say, look, before you type it, you're gonna crap on my team. Well, you're just worried about getting relegated. Yes, I am worried about getting relegated. And if we had a spot in the Big 12, we weren't able to get in the other two, I would be happy with that. What I couldn't abide is if we got relegated to the American or something. I don't even know if I'd continue the channel. Like that would throw the character of Rec Talk off. That would put me personally in disarray. So I couldn't do that. But I do feel like we could find a spot in the Big 12, and I haven't even kept up 100%. You've added a ton of teams, and shout out to the Big 12. All right, because I've kind of been hard on Florida State, particularly, and some other teams, but the ACC did not handle this the way they should have either. Like they sat on their grant of rights and just, I think, felt like this is going to quail any issues that we have until 2036. Whereas the Big 12 went out and got the best teams they could have gotten that were available, like Utah and BYU. Huge gets for the Big 12, and the Big 12, we were all talking about they're dead and gone when Texas and Oklahoma left, and they found a way to remain relevant. So shout out to them.
Yeah. And again, I'm someone who I'm on that side of things of people that you're saying that I don't really like the way all this stuff is going. I'm not all the way, I realize it's always changing and I think it needed to be changed, but I think a lot of the ways it's changing are not for the good. But I have to acknowledge, as a BYU fan, I've benefited from realignment because BYU got into the Big 12 because Texas and OU left the conference. But yeah, and I've been there, it's like, wow, we got in and our conference is already going to fall apart. We hadn't even officially joined, and there were already rumors of the Pac going after, potentially going after some of the remaining schools of the Big 12 and basically putting the death knell in, and even going after Houston. I think they were in some rumors and they hadn't even joined the Big 12 yet, and so I was like, shoot, man, like I finally get here and it's all going to fall apart. So yeah, I've been where Georgia Tech is, and yeah, it's a real concern. And so I'm also not someone, I think there's a lot of people out there that are definitely, those who are Florida State fans want to get out, but there's also, I've seen a lot of Big 12 fans who want to see the ACC go because they think, oh, Big 12 can go get some other schools and get even stronger. But I don't want to see that.
And I wouldn't blame people for that. Like, I totally get it. We're college
Right.
football fans because we love our schools and we want the best for our schools. So if there's a guy that's a Big 12 fan that wants the ACC to fail because it furthers their goals, I don't wish any ill will toward that. That's how I felt about the Big 12 when Texas and Oklahoma left. So
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't excited to see the Pac-12 go. I mean, I felt relieved and it was exciting because the Big 12 was going to stay and the Big 12 got stronger, but it kind of sucked how it had to happen.
I was
Although,
heartbroken because they
yeah,
had some of the best football in the country last year in the Pac-12 being played. I mean, they had Washington make the you know the playoffs and the finals. So hate to see it.
but the way the Pac-12 fans talked about Big 12, you go through social media and all that. I
Oh, I don't have that
you
experience.
felt vindicated and relieved in that regard. But I'm not looking for that outcome for the ACC, but I do think the Big 12 will benefit from it. Whether it's Georgia Tech or other schools, I do think Big 12 will be able to go in and add some additional programs and beef itself up. But it's just a shame that it has to come at the cost of that. In that case, it would be coming at the cost of another long-standing conference with a lot of tradition and tearing up some more of those rivalries and bits of college football that make the sport special.
And can I just mention for a second, because a lot of the catalyst for this is like antitrust, especially with Portal, like antitrust, you can't tell anyone where they can and can't go. But oxymoronically, it's being used to create an oligarchy of two conferences. Like it's the most backwards thing to me. Also, the SEC said you couldn't transfer during the spring portal period within the SEC. So where were all these antitrust people then? Why were they not filing for an injunction to quail that? It's insane to me. Like the double speak and just, I mean, it's like what I hate about politics is now what college football is becoming. And like, I can't stand it.
It's wild. I mean, yeah, you talk about the double speak. It's like the playoff. Oh, well, we want it to be more inclusive. We're going to add more spots. Or now March Madness, we're talking about adding more spots there, but not really for all the other schools, just specifically my schools. They're just, we just want more spots. We deserve more spots. So therefore, it's like, no, that's not why people wanted to see it, bigger tournament. That's not what people are looking for.
And that's what the SEC is wanting. We need more. They got their tails whipped in March Madness, conference wide. I know Alabama went far. Well, we need more schools in, so we have more chances. Playoffs too. They're not gonna get off that. The next time they look at this, they're going to want more schools in because we bring in the most money and we have the best schools. And they're going to have like a 3-loss conference champion too, because they have this super league now. And I don't want to hear the complaining from them. They're already complaining about their schedules. I can't stand the University of Georgia. I hate them. And I've hated them my whole life. And that's one of the things I love about college football is you can hate people for no reason other than who they root for. It's what I love about doing this. And they're already, because they've been saying the West is so weak. Well, now you're playing all those teams in the West, and I hear you complaining. I don't want to take your medicine. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have all the financial benefits and then, we're going to just tip the scales, wins and losses because we have harder schedules. I don't buy that.
Yeah, I wonder, there's got to be, and it's going to be impossible to get to a better system that is more equitable because they hold so many cards and they can continue to push for changes that only benefit them. And while they meanwhile throw, just enough to the other people. You look at the group of 5, for example, with this new playoff, the group of 5 is getting a bigger financial payout than under the 4-team playoff in football. But their overall percentage of the takeaways decreased from, I think, 22% to 9%. So,
and they don't get anything for making it. I don't think. Like if they make the playoffs, they don't get any more money for that.
So it's, they're happy because, we're getting a little bit more money, or they continue to say, we're at least represented. We at least have a seat at the table, but it's an illusion. And even now, as we talk, Big 12, you mentioned as a power conference, yes, but we've seen that power get stripped away because they keep talking about, well, you're going to get ACC and Big 12 get a lesser payout. And
I think the Big 12 is at the bottom, right, as far as revenue share.
Yeah, we're a couple percentage points, a few percentage points below ACC even. And so, and they're like, well, and we want additional, they didn't end up getting it, but they wanted additional seats in the playoff, and so it's just continued to benefit them. But I feel like there's got to be a way in which there's, maybe a way that you're only taking conference champions or whatever. Maybe there's not at large bids, because then you're saying, hey, look, that's putting the onus back on, and the focus back on the regular season. It's making these conference champions actually mean something. Those are essentially play-in games or to get into the playoff. And so for me, it's not going to happen. But if we had something like that, that would be great, because then it does go back to what it used to be. Is, oh man, the regular season is special because any given week, you lose something and that could, derail your whole season. Whereas now it's like, no, Alabama's already lost to Georgia, but if they beat them again in the, when they play a second time, now all of a sudden that they're, it's just,
we got to hamstring Texas in, and we don't make any sense to leave Bama out and all this nonsense. Hey guys, isn't it like we need to properly use antitrust laws? Like, isn't the deck just stacked to where no one can compete financially anymore? Wouldn't it make sense to actually apply antitrust laws here? I'm just asking for a friend.
Well, I am no antitrust law expert or anything.
Neither are they.
Yeah, apparently. So yeah, it's just crazy. It seems to be getting out of hand, but at the end of the day, I still love college football and I want to see it work out. And it's going to be hard to, I think it'll take a lot to get me to lose interest, but they're certainly doing their best to make it happen.
Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Right. So you have to rate my Southern accent from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most hick. What would you rate it? This is important to me.
Oh, wait, 10 is the most hick?
Yeah.
Okay.
10 is like Carl from Sling Blade, understandability.
Dude, I live in Virginia. I'd only put you at, I don't know, maybe a 2. It's not,
all right.
It's not bad. Dude, I was just on a different show in the college huddle. Actually, I don't know if it's been posted by the time I'm recording this, but it'll go up. And we had a couple guys on with, from Western Kentucky as well, and fans. And
so you're getting into Appalachia there.
Yeah. And that was a good Southern accent. No, that was good. And so no, yeah, I've got neighbors with much more. Thicker,
I forgot you're in Virginia.
Yeah. So no worries there. But yeah, so okay. To come back to this is what I've asked everybody on all of this is if you had to rank, and it sounds like you said you've done this in a video, but the likelihood of where Georgia Tech, after all this realignment, ends up, where they end, where you see them going. Is it between the ACC, sticking together? Is it Big 10, SEC, Big 12, or other? Out of all those options, how would you?
I haven't considered the ACC staying together. So I did a video on this, but I didn't consider the ACC staying together. And that changes things for me. Like, what's most likely?
Mm-hmm.
I am way higher on the ACC not imploding than probably anyone else that you'll hear. So I would think it's equally as likely they stay in the ACC as make the Big 12.
Okay.
And there's 0% chance they're going to the SEC. Like, they burned that bridge with Dodd and Bear Bryant and all those guys. And realistically, maybe right now, like a 13.75% chance they make the Big 10.
That's very specific, but okay.
Yeah, I've got algorithms like supercomputers behind the wall.
Excellent. I love it. I best of luck to Georgia Tech, however all this shakes out. I really appreciate you coming on. This was a fun conversation. I really enjoyed your videos too. They were really, really well done, and I loved the heat that you threw. And so if you haven't, please go check Rec Talk out on YouTube.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a ton of fun. And comment, rate my accent.
All right, and we'll put that in the show notes too, so you can find his stuff. All right, thanks so much, and catch you next time. And go Cougs.
Go Jackets.